Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ethan and I am fortunate to be in a position of responsibility with a respected engineering firm. I recently celebrated my 31st birthday and married a wonderful woman named Luna. We have been happily married for 7 years, and during that time we have been blessed with the birth of our beloved daughter. I prefer to call her the second love of my life. Interestingly, Lena and I met during her transition period when, after ending her first and only relationship, she dated a man for 2 years who, unfortunately, betrayed her trust and was unfaithful to her. Lena, like me, held on to conservative values in the relationship and decided to wait for marriage. A mutual friend introduced us at a joint picnic shortly after I graduated from college. Little did I know that this was a trap organized by our friends, and knowing her past, I decided not to rush things and try to approach her right away. One night, under the influence of alcohol, she climbed on top of me and expressed her wishes to me. Luckily, I was prepared and had purchased contraceptives for the stormy night to come, or at least that's what I convinced her of. Up until the wedding, our intimate moments were enjoyable, though they could be considered ordinary compared to others. But like many good things, it was not meant to last. I could never have imagined that my seemingly perfect wife would betray me. Luna had always maintained friendly relationships with other men, but never showed any signs of flirting or similar behavior. As the clock struck midnight, in the crowd next to us appeared our close friends Joe and Jennifer, who were close friends and had a daughter, Mary, the same age as our daughter, Izzy. Our daughters spent a lot of time playing together, and Joe or my wife would accompany them to various events. After Luna and I exchanged midnight kisses, the celebration went on for hours. Little did I know that this was the beginning of their romance, of their secret relationship, and of the eventual betrayal of my seemingly ideal wife. Later, Luna admitted that their intimacy had only begun on St. Patrick's Day. But their relationship crossed a new line when they made jewelry together for a St. Patrick's Day party. Unfortunately, in retrospect, I didn't notice signs that should have alerted me to the fact that Luna was becoming increasingly cautious in her communications with Joe, keeping their time together a secret, and insisting that they continue to be together despite the fact that Izzy no longer wanted to hang out with Mary. I couldn't help but notice that Luna was becoming less and less interested in our intimate time together, and although there were other signs, I preferred to ignore them because I didn't want to admit the truth, and I convinced myself that she was back to exercising and dieting again, and that this was purely an attempt to improve her health for the benefit of our relationship. Little did I know that by this time Luna's affair with Joe had been going on for about 3 months, and despite my suspicions, my doubts finally erupted when she refused to be intimate that night in her drunken state. I tried to explain it all away with fatigue, desperately hoping that my wife wasn't cheating on me, but deep down I knew that there couldn't possibly be any other explanation, and thinking about the amount of time that Luna had spent with Joe, I couldn't shake my growing suspicions, and the next morning I plucked up my courage and decided to talk to her and simply offer to make love. Her face turned pale, and although she tried to pass it off as drinking, her uncertain words and the panic in her eyes betrayed her deception. I wanted to check my spouse's cell phone and email, and unsurprisingly, when I tried to check her phone while she was in the shower, I discovered that her phone was password protected. This led me to think of other signs, such as a decline in intimacy in bed, which, although we've had our share of it, I blamed on the fact that I was busy at work. But this time I saw a faint but unmistakable odor on the sheets of the guest room bed, and unknowingly, I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence of my wife's infidelity, and naturally, I thought Joe was the most likely suspect. With the Memorial Day party only 2 days away, things were getting tense. Joe and his family were supposed to be coming to the upcoming annual open pool party, and in order to assuage my unwanted suspicions, I resolved to watch carefully for any possible signs of infidelity. My eyes were locked on Luna and Joe. I tried not to show it. Maybe it was just my imagination, a projection of what I subconsciously wished to see happen between them. Nevertheless, they kept exchanging glances between them, each time carefully checking to see if Jennifer and I were watching. I watched carefully as Joe walked around the bathroom and into the pantry. I crept closer and positioned myself next to the door. Through the vent in the door I was able to catch the conversation inside with my EAS. At first all I could hear was a faint, slurred moan coming from the inner room. The rustling grew louder and louder, and eventually I heard my wife's voice for the first time, confirming my worst fears that she really was in there. Her words pierced me like a sharp knife. She said I was spying on her and that intimacy was impossible in this place. I told Jennifer I wasn't feeling well and decided to go home. I told her to let my wife know as soon as she arrived. I lay on the couch and wallowed in self-pity for about an hour, unable to control my despair, now overcome with anger, even though I felt lost and unsure of what to do next. Luckily, I'm an engineer and therefore connected to smart techies. I knew that smartphones show their location if they are not turned off. With his help, we managed to get the information, and surprisingly, there was nothing particularly suspicious. Although Joe and Jennifer were checking in on the house often, it wasn't as often as I expected. I needed to find a way to gather information, and my friend recommended a program with which I could hack into my wife's phone and reflect her information directly back to mine, and when I doubted that I would be able to get into her phone, he convinced me that it wasn't necessary, and that all I needed to do was to send her an email containing the embedded program. I sent the message determined to find a way to record their behavior on the spot, but surprisingly the technician scoffed at my concerns and convinced me that it was a simple task. You already have a security system with an external camera installed, so we can easily add a wireless camera which can record video and sound, allowing you to monitor anywhere. We can even access the recordings. By my calculations, the installation process takes about an hour. On Wednesday, Izzy and Mary were going to summer dance camp and Luna was taking Izzy there, which was perfect timing. On the way home, I stopped at an electronics store to buy the recommended camera, and while waiting in line at the register, I received a notification on my phone, a barely noticeable notification that Luna had opened my email and installed the application, and to avoid arousing suspicion, I immediately turned off the sound on my phone so that Luna wouldn't find out that I could view her messages in real time. I tried to hide my emotions, trying to look happy, but my disguise was crumbling. As soon as Izzy fell asleep, I crept back into the office and gave Luna a chance to be alone, hoping she would correspond with Joe. He was happy to talk about how he was going to take the girls to dance camp and then come over to our house for an intimate diversion, and Joe was looking forward to spending the day enjoying my wife's company. We met at the nearest McDonald's restaurant, where I parked the car and waited patiently for Luna and Izzy to walk down the street. I was tasked with installing 6 cameras while the technician programmed them. The kitchen, the living room, the basement, our bedroom, and the 2 guest rooms. I strongly suspected that the guest rooms would become their favorite hangout. Fortunately, we finished the installation in time. I tried to suppress my emotions without sarcastically asking Luna how her day was going, and I felt a certain satisfaction in watching her panicked expression, but I realized that if I wanted revenge, I would have to restrain myself. Their stay in the kitchen was short and they were soon upstairs in the guest room, and despite the low sound I could clearly see how Luna and Joe were undressing, and I decided to skip their kissing as it was irrelevant to my ultimate goal. As I watched them making out, I received text messages to my personal account in which they bragged about the pleasure they were getting. Luna even mentioned my strange behavior to Joe, who perfunctorily dismissed her and continued to fail to notice or comprehend anything. I couldn't continue to watch, and I realized that I had gathered enough evidence to expose them, but I wanted to improve the sound quality and I planned to deal with the problem early in the morning before I went to work. The next day I patiently watched the imps on the phone as their car arrived as expected, and just like the day before, they walked into their bedroom unaware that they were being watched from their hidden study. I watched as they prepared for their lesson, the recording transmitting clearly, but listening to the phone call, I couldn't help but realize the irony of my actions, which had aroused Luna's suspicion and alarm. Joe laughed and said, "Isn't it marvelous that their efforts fund our carefree ways?" I had seen enough. Our relationship was on the brink of collapse, and I made the difficult decision to consult a lawyer about the most appropriate way to end our marriage. Without hesitation, my friend recommended a good attorney to me, and I contacted him to set up a meeting for that day. I presented the attorney with several pieces of video evidence as proof of Luna's betrayal and text messages. He was confident that she would agree to any terms we offered and expressed a desire to achieve the best possible outcome. I told him my intentions. The attorney offered to involve Jennifer in our plan, believing that appealing to 2 people at the same time would have a greater effect. I called Jennifer's office and got through to her secretary, and I left a message with Dr. Miller asking her to contact me as soon as possible. Less than 10 minutes later the phone rang and Jennifer was on the other end of the line asking me what had happened. Was everything okay? What was wrong? She asked me anxiously and I said that everything was fine physically but emphasized that we needed to talk. When I entered the office, the last patient had just been admitted. She quickly closed the door and was the first to speak. That shady man is cheating on me again, isn't he? Surprised, I asked, how did you find out about this? She replied, I may be busy at work, but I'm not stupid. I took out my cell phone and uploaded a couple of intimate videos of us as a couple. He's done, that despicable man is done. She growled, you're right, I don't think this is the first time he's cheated. Looks like you don't need the lawyer I recommended, I said. Jen smiled in agreement. No, but I will have my lawyer contact yours so we can synchronize our actions. She suggested that I gather evidence for another week or two before taking action. Jennifer correctly assumed that I was seeking a divorce as I had already turned to my attorney for help. We exchanged phone numbers and as soon as I got in the car I gave her my attorney's contact information. Jennifer didn't waste any time calling me. She had already contacted her attorney and she estimated that it would take her 2 weeks to formulate a proper strategy. From their text messages, Luna had expressed a desire to take the weekend off so as not to arouse my suspicions, and they planned to resume activities on Monday. I couldn't shake the anxious feeling that something might be wrong, or that she had doubts about our plans. I closed my office door and dialed her number. Oddly enough, she specifically advised me not to become intimate with my wife under any circumstances, and furthermore, she made it clear that kissing was also forbidden. But that wasn't a problem for me, as I was not at all happy with her presence. He seemed pleased that the girls were going to dance camp and imagined a whole week of playful entertainment. Jennifer asked to discuss the plan at the Friday luncheon. She had consulted her attorney and all the necessary preparations would be completed by the end of next week. Jennifer again warned me not to become intimate with Luna, and I assured her that such a reminder was superfluous, as I had no intention of doing so. In addition, text messages were exchanged between Joe and Luna indicating that Joe was also feeling uncomfortable on Sunday evening. Luna told Joe that she intended to take Monday off and suggested that they meet on Tuesday or Wednesday instead while at work on Wednesday. I quietly connected the security camera on my cell phone, and, unsurprisingly, Joe arrived as expected. Luna mentioned that, despite the fact that she was feeling uncomfortable, she still wanted to have intimacy with Joe. Thursday morning Luna said she was feeling better but felt uncomfortable walking out of my office. I watched their interaction carefully and when Joe drove home Luna stopped him in the kitchen. She said we couldn't sleep tonight. Joe didn't retort and Luna continued to talk about her physical pain and inability to have sex. They talked for a long time until Luna accused Joe of contracting a systemic disease. Joe made a defense and quickly left. I immediately contacted Jennifer to inform her of their condition, but she showed neither surprise nor concern. Jennifer told me that she contacted the authorities and requested that they be present when they encountered Joe on the street because, based on past experience, she was concerned that Joe would act aggressively when presented with evidence. Jennifer and Joe quickly left the meeting. I hurriedly drove and chose a shortcut so I could hurry to the house a few minutes before Luna. Fortunately, the police were nearby and managed to intervene before Joe was seriously hurt. Joe was taken into custody. Jennifer had a few scrapes and cuts but nothing serious, and just as I finished reading Jennifer's last message Luna walked into the room, completely unaware of the impending storm that was about to engulf her, and when she saw the suitcases she asked, "What are these suitcases?" "I want to show you something important." I pressed the play button and a screenshot of the text message conversation appeared on the TV screen. Luna suddenly stood up and exclaimed, "What was this?" I quickly paused the video. "Please sit down, everything will be clear now." I raised my voice and shouted. She started to speak but I quickly held up my hand signaling for her to stop. I pressed the play button again and the view of our guest room appeared on the screen. The Luna and Joe were in the room. I noticed Luna was stunned. She covered her mouth with her hand. It was obvious that they hadn't noticed that their behavior was being recorded while we were minding our own business. Luna's tears were streaming down her face as she begged me to stop. I paused the TV to see how my beloved wife was confessing. Luna got up from her seat and again accused me of hacking her phone and emphasized that it was illegal. She took out her phone and was ready to act. I ordered her to sit down and remain silent. If she was planning to contact her lover or send him a message, I advised her not to worry. Jennifer had already shown him the irrefutable evidence we had gathered. Maybe you don't know it, but you are not his first, second, or even third affair. He has lost everything, and by the way, so have you, I said as Luna burst into tears. She begged for my forgiveness, expressing her deep remorse, and she repeatedly asked me what she could do to atone for her sins. I explained that you would receive 30% of our property and get the house. In addition, you would have reasonable rights to visit your daughter and would not be required to pay alimony. Of course, supervised visits would be necessary. As I spoke, Luna's reaction was immediately enraged. She exclaimed, "Who do you think you are and why on earth would I sign such an agreement?" She replied firmly. "First of all, I'm the husband of a liar and I've been cheating on you with our neighbor for the past 6 months. Secondly, if you refuse to sign the contract, then we will go to trial, during which the videos of you and Joe committing the crime will be made public. And lastly, I really don't want those videos to be made public." Luna turned to our daughter Izzy and tearfully inquired about her reaction. I just shrugged my shoulders in agreement with her decision and turned my attention to another part of the video. I asked Luna, "Would you like me to send the first video to your parents or to the director?" Luna protested, warning me that I would face consequences for distributing such explicit content. I said that I was an engineer and that the video would be sent from an unknown account. Luna continued to argue for a few minutes until I threatened to hit the send button. 5 minutes later, she drove away, the divorce papers were signed, and we parted ways. On Sunday, a car drove up to the door. It was Luna's father, Mr. Anderson. He stormed into the house full of rage, accusing me of forcibly evicting my daughter. I sternly told him to shut up and asked him to come inside. When I told him about my daughter's infidelity, Luna didn't tell her father the truth. I showed him an incriminating video and he was immediately silenced. At first, he tried to reject the video as fake, but I convinced him that I had many hours of footage if you wanted to see it. His only request was that he and his wife remain involved in Izzy's life. I agreed to that condition, and after completing the necessary paperwork, I let Luna's father pick up the rest of the stuff after a couple months in jail. Joe was missing, and breaking the news to Izzy was the most difficult task I'd ever tackled. She was too young to understand her mother's behavior. Izzy hadn't seen her mother in 6 months. At first my parents assured me she couldn't communicate with Luna, but then I found out that Luna was hospitalized with the discovery of an incurable venereal disease. The medical staff managed to cope with the symptoms of a rash that was highly contagious and could not be cured. Upon learning of the diagnosis, I took immediate action and appealed to the court to restrict Luna's physical contact with her daughter. She said, "Luna is no longer with us and it's all your fault," to which I firmly replied, "No, Mrs. Anderson, I am not happy. I have not been happy since the day I found out that your daughter had been unfaithful to me. So, Mrs. Anderson, I can assure you that I am not happy that I have to tell my daughter that her mother's choices have led to such a tragic outcome." I worked up the courage to ask her if she knew about the contagious disease Joe and Luna had contracted, and she looked me straight in the eye and replied, "You'd better not ask that question. That's why Jennifer always told me not to get intimate with Luna. Are you ready? Then let's get started. My husband and I have been together for 9 years, 2 of them married. I was in a relationship in Essex before I met my husband. Our relationship is full and happy, except for one aspect of our intimate life, and that is that my husband often has a lower desire for intimacy than I do, and if I'm prepared to engage in intimacy several times a day, then his frequency tends to be once a week. I often have an unfulfilled feeling as if something is missing, and to compensate for this feeling I take matters into my own hands, up to 3 times a day, and in spite of this, my husband remains my closest and dearest person. Despite this, our relationship diverged. Our emotional connection was so strong and our compatibility so undeniable that I couldn't help but fall in love with him from the first time we met. Both my husband and I suffer from depression and attention deficit. Our shared values further strengthen our bond. Unfortunately, we have faced offensive remarks from others who are unable to understand our connection and often believe that we don't belong with each other simply because of outward signs. Over the years, I have often expressed to him my admiration for his appearance. I have made many attempts to discuss my physical needs with my husband, discussing the topic with love and compassion and trying to consider all points of view. His behavior, while within his rights, has deeply hurt my feelings, and whenever I express my displeasure, it tends to cause him to resent himself for what seems to be his best attempts to please me and even to have meaningful conversations about our intimate desires. The most effective way to resolve the intimacy issues between us was for me to be direct about my desire for intimacy with him, and he would acknowledge my request, say he would think about it, and sometimes a day or two later, he would begin physical contact, usually in the middle of the night. The important thing is that I never acted on these obsessive thoughts and remained faithful to my husband, but they were a constant torment to my thoughts. I must admit that these fantasies were very confusing to me, and I was fully aware that my desires were unhealthy, but sometimes I still had to fulfill them, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was spending all of my feminine energy on a partner who couldn't fully appreciate it. Interestingly, the more careful I am about discussing this topic with my husband, the less he seeks intimacy with me. Maybe if I just went through this struggle alone and didn't feel anything for my husband or close friends, then maybe everything would be easier. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't want to break contact with them because our lives were so closely intertwined. I just couldn't get over the idea that I had deep feelings for him. But one Sunday evening when friends came over to see us, our mutual acquaintance turned up next to me. I don't remember the details, but somehow our legs unknowingly pressed together under the table and we began to stroke each other's. I wanted to be alone, away from prying eyes, even though the feeling was surging. Despite the undoubted attraction of our mutual friend, I was firmly determined to be faithful to my husband, not wanting to betray his trust in me, and despite his constant flirtatious messages, I always treated them with courtesy. In my mind's eye, I imagined an alternate reality in which couples could explore physical connection with their spouse's consent, perhaps within the framework of an open relationship. To beginning the conversation was certainly not easy, but I understood that it was important to maintain the health of our relationship, so I resolved to touch on the delicate topic of open relationships, carefully explaining that my intentions had nothing to do with finding an emotional connection elsewhere, but rather to satisfy my carnal desires with his knowledge and consent. At first my husband was a bit taken off guard and reacted violently as he tried to understand why my fulfillment could not be found in him alone. Over the next few weeks we had many genuine conversations, delving into the nuances of an open relationship, scrutinizing the potential benefits and problems that could arise, but after exploring all the possible options, he ultimately expressed his reluctance on the grounds that an open relationship would be unbalanced and that I would be more successful than he was. I suggested that I could also organize women's participation for him. This proposal opened up a whole new area of emotions and issues for us. We began the difficult road of establishing clear boundaries and anticipating possible problems. To surprise my husband, I carefully planned our first night together without revealing my plans. I lay in bed with the lady we had invited, anticipating his arrival. At first, he was nervous and unsure of what to expect, but we took the time to create a comfortable and relaxed atmosphere for him. What happened that night was an incredibly pleasant experience for all of us. My husband also embraced the meeting and found joy and satisfaction in it. After this woman left, my husband thought about how important my pleasure was and realized that completely suppressing my desires would lead to resentment and dysfunction in our relationship. Initially, we investigated my husband's meetings with several women who had established intimate relationships, and over time he strengthened our connection more and more, which brought him to a level where he began to calmly accept the fact that I was in a relationship with another man, and that we had already had different experiences of intimacy when my husband expressed his consent for me to date other men. In our conversations, he made it clear that when I began to explore relationships with other men, he did not want to know any details about the participants. We set boundaries, specifically that protective equipment must be used, and agreed that each of us had the right to terminate the relationship at any time. In addition, my husband insisted that we could not enter into a relationship with any of our acquaintances, and although I felt some discomfort with this restriction, I chose not to voice my concerns in the hope that he would eventually reconsider his position. Our flirtatious correspondence began that fateful night when we were playing Ladushki under the table, which set the stage for our new relationship. I was secretly seeing a mutual friend without my husband's knowledge. Our friends thought I was cheating on my husband, which made me worry about the state of my marriage. In order to avoid negative consequences, I took precautions and used protective devices against possible unwanted pregnancies. Surprisingly, my husband remained true to his word and never asked me about my extramarital affairs throughout the entire month of our open relationship. At parties we attended, I found myself with two people, one a mutual friend and the other someone I met online. When my husband calmed down, we discussed the situation rationally, understood his concerns, and I agreed to end the relationship with the mutual friend. To resolve the issue, my husband asked me to send a text message in front of him officially ending the relationship with the mutual friend. I realized how much of an impact this would have on my husband, so not only did I end my relationship with the friend he knew about, but I also ended my relationship with another mutual friend he knew nothing about. They corresponded regularly, took walks in the park together, and she even invited him to family events. I felt anxious and decided to talk to him about it. I expressed my concerns, emphasizing that our initial agreement for a free relationship was purely physical and that he seemed to have an emotional connection with her. He admitted that during our open relationship he had impregnated another woman and that she intended to continue carrying the pregnancy. As his words flowed through my veins, I tried to understand how such a situation could have developed. I had it in my head how such a thing could have happened, but this incident shattered the illusion of control that I had been clinging to for so long. The rules we had set up had been violated, and I felt deeply betrayed. This unexpected turn of events was not part of our plan. Waves of panic and anger overwhelmed me. The mix of emotions was unfathomable. The gravity of his behavior and its impact on the relationship was too great. My heart carried the burden of pain and I found the strength to rebel against him. I pleaded with him to let her terminate the pregnancy, hoping he would realize the gravity of the situation. My plea was out of a deep fear of losing my love and the life we had worked so hard to build together. I really wanted him to prioritize our relationship over an unexpected turn of events that could potentially tear us apart. The fact that he chose to live with her made me feel rejected and abandoned, and the fact that he didn't seem to notice the immense pain I was going through added to my pain. I began to wonder if his love for me was real or just an illusion. In the midst of my mental anguish, I realized I couldn't remain in a relationship that no longer valued my feelings. It was incredibly painful to watch him go to another woman, and how their relationship evolved and mine crumbled, and I had to muster the courage to leave in order to carve my own path. The road to the end of our marriage was long and painful. He pushed me to my limits and tested my strength and resolve. I longed for the love we had lost and for its return. I missed the laughter we used to share, the dreams and the security that hugs gave me. Whether I regret proposing an open relationship to my husband, I'm not sure. Maybe I had to break it off because he couldn't fulfill my deepest desires or reveal the essence of who I am.